Hello, this is Orion Taraban, and this is PsycHacks, Better Living Through Psychology. And I'm very excited to have on the podcast today Mr. Ken Curry. Ken has been a personal friend of mine for several years. He is, like me, a therapist who specializes in men's mental health. He's based out of the state of Colorado. And we got in touch with each other several years ago when I was trying to build a directory of therapists who specialized in men's mental health. And because there are few and far between, I don't know if there's anyone else in the state of California that I'm personally aware of who does what I do. And I was interested in finding a professional network because I was getting interest from men all over the country who wanted to work with me. But unfortunately, due to licensing restrictions, I couldn't do psychotherapy with people who lived outside of the state. So I was trying to find other folks that I could refer these interested men to, as well as just build a professional network, just to swap stories and professional and personal support. And Ken's been great with respect to that. He's been a good friend, and I'm very happy to have you on the podcast today, Ken. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Orion. Much appreciated. Thanks for the invitation, for sure.
Of course. Well, I think it might be, since I began the conversation by talking about our work in the context of men's mental health, I think you have is it right to call a program? It's called The Solid Man, and you've written a number of books, and you guide men through a process. Is that what to say? Would you talk to me about this?
Sure. Let me say a couple things about my license in Colorado is LMFT, Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist. And I really took that and started working with men years ago. It became something that was a passion of mine, mostly because of my own internal work and the things that I was working on for myself. And so as I started to develop my groups for men, I started to develop a curriculum to help guys walk through life and really building a really solid sense of self, identity, strength, confidence, really helping men to have a much more significant presence in their life. And so that was what I started building was my curriculum to develop and help men to become, I call it, I empower men. And some people don't like the idea of empowering men, but that's what I do. And so the Solid Man process definitely is designed to help men move from point A to point B, from a point where I'm not really strong. I don't really know who I am. I don't really have a lot of confidence. I might be embroiled in a number of different addictions, maybe porn, alcohol, other things that guys just get stuck in. And so really helping men kind of build a life that is strong. And really building their relationships. So that's what I've developed. And let's see, I have my website is called solidman.com. And yeah, you're right. I have a few books.
We'll make sure we get the pitch in a little bit later in the episode.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
What I heard right now is that your system sort of evolved organically over the years of working with hundreds or thousands of guys, and you kind of codified it into a system to guide people from feeling lost or unsure of themselves to having a strong sense of self, purpose, and confidence. Is that a good summary there?
Yeah, that's a great summary. Yep.
And you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, over a decade, about 15 years.
All right. Now, that's interesting. Have you noticed that the presentation of the men that you've worked with has changed over that time? And if so, what do you think might be some of the most prevalent issues facing men today?
That's a really good question. So let's see, one of the most profound guys that I've been working with is Dr. Robert Glover and his No More Mr. Nice Guy work. And so he really outlines what I think is a really significant part of the problem. And that is the whole idea of a man being nice. And so it's really interesting. His book is like 20 years old and it's only getting more steam. So it's like you see the problem of men being nice guys. And it feels like that it's been something that's been culturally programmed into men to be more submissive, to be more wanting to make their women happy, the whole happy wife, happy life thing, that's kind of been the thing that has been told men. If you do these things, and then life is going to be good for you. It's going to work. And the problem is that most guys have been finding out that that is not the case. It is like the opposite, where it's like it creates more problems than they could ever imagine, being this nice, submissive man and making other people happy, being a pleaser or an appeaser, living for approval, that type of thing. And so that's been what I've been seeing as a really significant problem. For me, I kind of take Glover's stuff a little bit further, and I define it as the problem is the externally referenced life. That a man living in externally, where I live to please, I want people to be happy with me, I live to what everybody else's expectations are. And when I live like that, I'm living always thinking about what does everybody else think? What does everybody else want? And I'm living to make those things happen and to get the validation that I need. Instead of what I think is where I take guys is building an internally referenced life where I'm living to please myself. I'm living to make me happy, which initially for most guys sounds really horribly selfish. And it's a really tough thing to get over, to be able to think about, oh my gosh, that's selfish. I'm living to please myself, because it's the opposite of what I've been conditioned to do, to make everybody else happy. And so that's been a really, really big shift. I help guys to make that shift. And when you become more internally referenced, you're finding out who you really are, find out what's valuable to you. What are your values? Where does your value and self-worth actually come from as an individual, as a person? And really being able to identify what are my internal resources telling me about how to move through life. And those internal resources, like my body, my intuition, my mind, the things I see as wise, what's important to me, what are my values, my emotions, which really tell you what I want and need in life, and all the stuff inside of me guiding me. And it actually creates a really, really significant life when you start to live from an internal place rather than external. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So I read Glover's book a while ago, and I think it's an excellent text for a lot of guys to read, because from my experience, it put something that I was sort of dimly or partially aware of into a very concrete and explicit framework that was easy to understand. It just sort of sharpened a lot of things I kind of knew into a starker focus.
Yeah.
So I could see them better. And I think that the nice guy syndrome, as I understand it, is summarized by like the covert contract, which is that I can earn love and respect, sex and relationship, but I do it indirectly by performing acts of service that may not even be wanted or required for others, in the hopes that I could potentially further down the road get what I want, or indirectly. And yeah, I think that it's important for guys to be able to be selfish, to say, this is who I am and this is what I want. In the beginning, it is extremely difficult for them to do that. And I do think that in the beginning, that selfishness can take a more, let's say, childish or hedonistic tone, where it's like, I feel like having a steak, I'm just going to have a steak. Or I feel like playing video games, I'm just going to do it. It's almost like a regression back to the last time when they were assertive about their needs or wants, which is generally children. Children are very assertive about what they want and what they don't want. But what I found is that most people can't stay at that level for very long. Like, if there's only so many beers you can drink, there's only so many video games that you can play. And then you start to think, well, selfishly, I want to do something more meaningful, or I want to challenge myself. And I think in the process of that, you create greater value for yourself and your life. And then you get to a point where, well, selfishly, I want to share this with other people, because my joy will be increased if I can share my goodness with other people. And then you can invite people into your life who want to be there, as opposed to trying to drag them in. You can kind of just say, this is who I am. This is what I'm all about. Would you like to join me? And then you can be surrounded by women and friends and colleagues and things like that. But that's still kind of on some level from a place of selfishness. It's that I've decided that for my own pleasure, I'm going to give, as opposed
Mhm.
to I'm giving from in the hopes that I can barter for something that I don't yet have. Does that make sense?
No, you're saying the barter that you don't yet have, that would be the covert contract thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't yet have that sense of love or respect in my life, so I'm going to trade it for money, attention, service. But
Mhm.
when I feel like I have abundance in my life, I don't really have to trade abundance for more abundance. I can just
Right.
give
Right.
it because it's my pleasure to do so.
Yeah, I think the initial thing you're talking about, the childish selfishness, really, I think initially it comes out where you're now testing your ability to say, what do I want? Because most guys, because they've been so externally referenced, they don't know what they want. They have never exercised that muscle. What do I really want? And that's what it comes down to. What do I really want? Because initially they might pursue some things. Okay, now I have permission to pursue what I want.
Mhm.
And they're pursuing things that aren't necessarily the most healthiest things. And so I want to play video games, or I want to do this, and you start exercising it, but you're pursuing things that aren't necessarily the like I said, the healthiest things. They might be counterfeits to
Sure.
what really is going to bring that level of purpose or fulfillment.
The way
And
the way I
so,
oh go
yeah,
ahead, please.
go ahead.
Well, the way that I think about that is that we're always in a process of becoming.
Hmm.
We don't ever really know who we are right now. We know who we have been in the past. And unless we check in with ourselves on a regular basis, the gap between who we are now and who we think we are
Hmm.
might be years or even decades. And if somebody has spent his most of his adult life um, chasing external validation, the last time he might have been sure of what he wanted was childhood. And
Hmm.
so he's running like an outdated OS. And he goes back to the sources of pleasure and satisfaction when he was last most certain of them.
Hmm.
Um, and what's interesting is they probably don't provide the joy and satisfaction that they once did. And then the man can sometimes feel like he's depressed, that he's lost, that even the things that once provided him joy no longer do so. But that could be appropriate. The things that bring us joy and
Hmm.
satisfaction when we're 12 shouldn't be the things that bring us joy and
Hmm.
satisfaction when we're 22, let alone 42. So sometimes, if it's been a while because of the busyness of life or because of one's attitudes towards others, I think it's important to enter into a period of like open-minded experimentation where you go out into life and say, well, I actually don't know what I like. I actually don't know what I
Hmm.
want. Let's try things and not have any contempt prior to investigation so that I can see how these different experiences actually feel for me, how they resonate. And I can learn from that emotional response who I am now, what I like
Hmm.
now, what I want now. A lot of the guys that I work with, when we start working, they don't know what they want, but generally people know what they don't want. It's generally
Hmm.
easier to know what you don't want. So if you don't yet know what you want, listeners, it's sometimes better to start with what you don't and walk in the opposite direction for a while.
Yeah,
Most people,
I definitely like what you're saying. Orion, you're bringing up the two big questions, and in family therapy, it's the differentiation questions, and differentiation being the fancy word for being able to be my own self in my own life or in a relationship where I don't lose my sense of self, or I'm my person is not absorbed or lost in the relationship.
Mhm.
And that's the differentiation. And the questions are, who am I? What do I want? And most guys, they don't know the answer to those two questions, like we're saying. And so being able to ask, who am I and what do I want? Like you said, it's a journey. I'm going to find out who I am, what I want. And that puts me in a position once I start even asking those questions where I can start to actually become myself finally in my own life, because I have allowed myself to be absorbed or lost in the relationship. And that is a really powerful thing, just to be able to start asking those two questions. And because the who am I question, the identity question, who am I? What's my character? What's my value? What's my worth? Most people are just drenched in shame, shame being that thing that says something's wrong with me, or I'm defective, I'm not good enough. And when you start to develop that, where I am okay, I'm not perfect, but I'm okay, then I can start to trust what's going on inside of me and trust my the things that I want. And I love what you're saying, because it is a process of learning. What is it that I really want? And as I started, you kind of outlined that, where finally I'm starting to, I want people in my life to thrive. I want my family to be loved. I want, those things are things that I want, that are incredible for everybody who's involved. And that's what I find with most guys. We hear all the toxic masculinity stuff and everything, that if a man was empowered, he would be oppressive. And that narrative is just so wrong and so off base, because every guy I run into, when they start to actually be themselves and live according to what they want, they're actually wanting everybody else in their life, their family, their wives, their girlfriends, their friends, everybody to thrive. I want everybody to be doing well.
I think that's very common. And maybe what we can postulate here is that the more, let's say, elevated the self, the more that selfishness includes the well-being of those around him.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of makes sense. It's like, if I were living with a woman, I would want her to be doing really well, because I would have to be in her space a lot of the time. So even if it was just out of a selfish desire for peace and harmony, I would want her to be thriving. And the more abundant and the more secure I am in my sense of self, the more that I can see that I'm a part of an expanding web of relationships that stretch out into my family, into my coworkers, into my community, and potentially even to humanity as a whole. And selfishly, I mean, no man is an island, right? So the highest perfection of self requires the elevation of actually the rest of humanity in order to be perfected and sustained. So I think that's like selfishness at its highest level. And not everybody is there yet, and that's totally fine. Maybe we're all stumbling in that direction.
No, but it's so interesting. It's so interesting that everybody pretty much across the board, when they hear the word selfish, it's like it's a totally negative connotation. I can't be selfish. So I'll joke and use the word selfness. Okay, if selfish isn't right, let's go selfness. But it's the idea that what you're talking about is there is something about a noble aspect of selfishness, and that sounds unheard of. That's not something people talk about.
I'm a big fan of selfishness, especially in relationships. One of the things I counsel men to do is to find someone with compatible selfishnesses, because the alternative is like a lifetime of compromise, which is often two people not getting what they want, and often keeping score of like goods forwent or debts incurred. So it's like, if I'm the kind of guy who needs a lot of space for my own kind of peace of mind or well-being, then it kind of makes sense for me to find somebody who also needs somebody who is more independent, because that selfishly works for her. And so we have compatible selfishnesses. You see?
I do.
Sure.
And the other category that I enjoy selfishness, or I coach guys to engage in selfishness, is the category that I said earlier, that usually most men, and this isn't men, women do it as well, the whole idea of losing myself, being absorbed into the relationship, and having a sense of self and selfishness actually is me being me in the relationship. It feels like the most absurd statement that I have. When I ask guys, I tell guys, you need to be you in your own life. And it's like, because they haven't been themselves in their own life. I am somebody who I'm supposed to be, or I'm playing a role that other people want you to be, rather than being myself, or who I am at my core, and moving forward into my life with my own identity and with what I want and need in my life. So, yeah.
Well, we talked, what was the word you used from family therapy? It was
Differentiation.
differentiation. Okay, so this is something that seems to be a pretty ubiquitous issue, especially in long-term relationships or
Hmm.
marriage. It used to be that a man's house was his castle.
Hmm.
Now, at best, it seems like he has a man cave or a garage, and the house has been sort of taken over by the women. The decorations are all what the women
Hmm.
decide.
Throw
Um,
pillows everywhere.
sure. And we've heard the phrase like betatization by 10,000 concessions. It didn't seem to be this way, 2 generations ago. I wasn't there, but it doesn't seem that way from looking at my grandparents' lives and the media from that time. Men would just say, "Yep, I'm going out for war," or "I'm a traveling salesman. I'll be back in 6 months." Um, they certainly didn't seem to feel like there were the doilies everywhere in the house. What's going on? Like, is it because I also made this video recently about how feminine love is different from masculine love, and kind of a woman in love, it's more consumptive. Like if it could, it would want all of your love and all of your
Hmm.
attention and know all of your thoughts. And how do you have that differentiation over 40 years when there's this like maybe a relentless force, like a tide that's just sort of slowly
Hmm.
always kind of wanting a little bit more? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I do. You use the word consumptive. I'll use the word absorptive, that it's
Okay.
absorption. That's the concept that I use. It's the same exact thing where I'm being consumed, I'm being absorbed into her world. And the whole thing of the house being it's so interesting that you're saying this, Orion, because that I recently have done a massive my front room kitchen area remodel, right?
Mhm.
And so the whole thing of how we've gone through the process of being able to pick and choose what we're doing and all this, and how some things I've had a voice, some things I've been like, no, you just choose what you want. And so it's been, but I'm really, really happy with our front room and our kitchen area and everything. I'm way happy with how it is because it's mine, because mostly I built it. I didn't build the cabinets, but I put them in and put the flooring in. It did everything. Not everything, almost pretty much all. But the whole thing of what you're talking about, more than the decorations, is, do I lose myself? And in a way, and we a lot of the conversation is the whole idea of of frame, my frame as a man. And when I walk into my house, do I lose my frame? Do I turn into a little submissive boy and mom can tell me everything about what's going on in the house? And there's a lot of guys that have that as a component. That at work, they have frame, they hire and fire and they build things and they do things, but when they get home, they have a completely different posture.
That's certainly true. Some guys can be very submissive relative to their women. In the most of the relationships that I personally see, the woman is the more powerful party in the relationship. But I also see, I mean, what do you think about the idea of more egalitarian relationships? Can a man maintain frame within that kind of belief structure? Or is
And
that sort of a slippery slope down towards concessions?
help me, tell me what you believe the egalitarian to be.
Sure. I think that the egalitarian model of relationships is that we're partners and we're making, like, we have equal decision making power. We share the childcare, we share the chores, we split the bills, and no one person is the boss of the other person. No one person has more power than the other. And is it possible to maintain frame in that situation?
That's a great question. I'm just thinking about my answer. Gosh, this is really hard because I don't have a problem with each person having a lot of power in the relationship. I think being a power couple is actually what you want to seek, where both people are really significantly strong individuals, where they're standing on their own 2 feet, where they're developing their own purposes, where they're creating a relationship where everybody in the relationship is empowered. The whole idea of power couple is something that my wife and I have been seeking. So being able to make sure everybody's powerful, but that doesn't necessarily fit the egalitarian model, because when it comes down to it, gosh, this is really hard for me, because I don't know why it's really tough for me right now, even talking about it, because it's like what I have going on. I have a really strong frame. I know who I am. I know what I want, and I have a really strong presence in my relationship. But that strong presence that I've had in the relationship has also empowered my wife to be really strong as well. And for her to be able to develop her career, she's developed, since the kids have been out of the house, since we're empty nests, she has created a really, really significant career. It's been awesome to see. And so but when it comes to your question, I'm trying to think of what is it that you're asking.
Okay, let me try again. Well,
Yeah.
I think you brought up an interesting point, which is that power isn't necessarily a zero-sum game.
It's not.
That you, just because one person is more powerful doesn't mean the other person is necessarily weakened, and that both a man and a woman in a relationship can be powerful in that relationship. The egalitarian model is, I think, based on, it's not, how do I put it? How do I experience it?
Can I jump in, Orion, on
Sure,
that?
go ahead.
Because I think when you said zero sum, I think that's the game. Because the zero sum is that one, we'll see, plus one minus one equals zero. And so what it is the plus one is the person with the power, the minus one is the person without the power, and it's the zero sum, right? And so I think that's the game that most egalitarians play. The whole idea of one person has the power, the other doesn't, even though you said the whole thing of, we're both equal in this. But I think when it really comes down to it, most people in that world play a zero-sum power game where it's like they're all fighting for 50%. And am I going to get 51 or am I at 49? And what I'm describing is what I call abundant power, where it's not a zero sum. There's not 50% that you're fighting over. There's massive amounts of power that everybody has at their disposal. And so as a man, I am a powerful man. And that's why I want to empower men, but it's not to have power over anybody. I want power, like I was saying, I've empowered my wife. My power as a man has empowered her to become the strongest person that she can become. And her becoming powerful doesn't diminish my power at all. As a matter of fact, it empowers me even more to be able to do this. So both of the power couple, there's no zero sum. It's like we're both becoming more powerful and more powerful as the years go by. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I do think a lot of the tendencies towards egalitarianism in relationships grow out of a discomfort with power. And the idea here is that if it's perfectly matched 50-50, we can sort of eliminate the influence of power in our relationships, because the idea of power and makes me uncomfortable. So I'd rather balance it out so that we can pretend that it doesn't exist. But as we've just been describing, it sounds like we agree that power isn't necessarily a zero-sum game. Another dimension of egalitarian relationships that I see is like the need to discuss everything. It's like there's less of a, no, we're gonna put this flooring in on the kitchen, or even I'm gonna take Tuesday off to go fishing. It's more like, let's talk about the floors. Let's talk about the Tuesday night. What are we going to do for dinner? And it's always arriving at a consensus. I think that's also another feature of a lot of egalitarian models, is that we do everything together and we make decisions jointly in as many different domains as possible. And is that like a seeding of frame to behave in that way?
Such a great question. So I think the category of, like you were saying, I'm going to go fishing on Tuesday. I'm not going to ask permission, but since I'm in a relationship, I might ask, did we have anything else planned on Tuesday? or was there something else? I might ask, is there something going on? Because there's three entities here that we're talking about. There's me, my wife, and the relationship, the marriage. It's an entity. We've created something, a being that actually exists, and it's something that we take care of and that we grow and that we develop. And so some things are all about me. I'm going to go fishing on Tuesday. Some things are all about her. She's going to go do this and that and do whatever she needs to do. But then there are a significant amount of things that we do as a couple. And that when you're kind of bringing up the whole idea of conceding, and the answer is yes. There are some times when I would concede what I want or when I want it to be able to do something as a couple. I don't know if that's answering your question.
I think so. I think you're saying that, yeah, sometimes it's, well, to enter into that mutual deliberation is a ceding a frame. But what's more, it sounds like you're saying that sometimes that is appropriate to do.
Yeah, it is. So the ceding of frame would be, or let's say making a personal sacrifice. I'm making a personal sacrifice to not go fishing on Tuesday because we had something else planned, or there was who knows what else. I have nothing's coming to mind of what it might be.
What if it's not something else planned, but she just doesn't want you to go? She thought maybe, she's going to be sad being all alone, or that she'd rather just cuddle on the couch with you.
Oh, well, that I would not submit to, because she'll get enough cuddling. And the thing is, most people, most women understand if they have that thing where they feel like, oh my gosh, he's not spending time with me. Most women they'll say, if my husband goes out and spends a day fishing, he comes back a much more energized, loving individual. He's coming back more energized, or his tank is now full. Because if he stayed home and just watched some chick flick or The Bachelor on TV while he's snuggling on the couch, he's losing his soul. His soul is shriveling and just dying. But if he's out fishing or doing something that he loves to do, he's going to come back a much more energetic man. And that's what she wants. I want you to be present with me. And so that's not something you can concede.
And so to be present, women might need to appreciate that men need to be absent for a while.
Absolutely. And this is Esther Perel's thing. She's saying in order for passion to happen, you need space. She uses the fire triangle illustration. If you smother all the boards together and try to build a fire, there's no fire. But if you put it a TP and it has space in it and has all the space for the air to flow through, it grows a beautiful fire.
And do you think it's primarily the man's responsibility to maintain that space in the relationship, especially in light of what we are describing as women's tendency towards absorptive or consumptive love?
I think so. It all depends. My wife does a great job with her own time, with me being off, because we have really good times when we're together. But the thing is, I think to the point that we're making, because we have a significant amount of space where we're doing our own thing, that we have, that the times when we are together are really quality times. And so I think but you're kind of talking about the potentially the woman's gatekeeper of the relationship, the man's kind of the gatekeeper of the space, or something like that.
Maybe. I feel like it's always fallen to me to maintain that space. And what it seems to me is that the longer I'm in a relationship, the more the woman wants to get closer and closer and decrease the intervals in that absence, and to join more and more together. And that's the tendency in the woman. And I have to kind of consciously and intentionally put the brakes on, create some space and distance. I'm a huge fan of less frequent but higher quality interactions. And I had that conversation recently. I think that is preferable for me to have that kind of low quality, constant togetherness that's just sort of like existing in the same room. A long time ago, I cohabitated with a woman, and after 6 months, I felt like I was furniture to her. Like she would just walk right past me without looking at me, and she'd be sitting next to me on her phone. And I just felt schmucky in that situation, to be honest. So I prefer, when I'm with somebody, to give them my full undivided attention. I kind of expect that from them as well. And if we can't do that for whatever reason, because we're not interested or we're preoccupied or we're busy, to just table that until such times when that is possible. But the pushback from that is generally like, well, I kind of like the coziness. I like being around, even if we're not interacting, even if it's not that level of relating. I still like to be around. I still like to be with you. I've seen that more from the women in my life. Does that make sense, Ken?
It does. It totally makes sense. I'm just not sure. There may be reasons why that is. I'm not sure exactly why. But the kind of one of the concepts that I think is really at play here. We hear a ton about attachment theory.
Sure.
And attachment theory, I think, has really come from a more of a feminine side of therapy, where
it comes from mothers and their children, literally.
Pretty much, right?
That's the research that
that's the
theory is based on.
Right. And so what we're talking about, and I think we could probably go forward with writing a whole book and a whole nother theory, and from a masculine side of it, is detachment theory.
Right? Tell me more about this.
Right, but that's what we're talking about, Orion. How do I walk through life as a man who stands on his own 2 feet? This is something that I've said from the beginning of our conversation. The whole idea of being an empowered man who knows who he is and knows what he wants. And I'm standing on my own 2 feet. I don't need you in my life. Now, see, the whole thing of the you complete me BS and chick flicks and all that, it's all romantic and everything, and it sounds good, but it's ridiculous relationship concepts. Where if I need you in my life to complete me and make me feel better about myself, then the relationship is going to falter horribly. And so the whole thing of, if I am detached from you and I am a whole and complete human being where I'm okay by myself, the whole differentiation piece, I'm okay by myself, I don't need you. Now I can actually say, I want you in my life. And I invite you into my life, not as something to fill the void in my identity or make me feel whole and complete, but I'm inviting you in my life as somebody who is a complement to my life, or somebody who is a partner in my life. But I'm not inviting you in to resolve my internal conflicts.
Oh, certainly. I love the detachment theory idea, because I'm thinking about all the philosophies throughout my life that have really resonated with me, like mystic Christianity, to be in the world but not of the world, or Buddhism, the path of renunciation, or Stoicism, where you're practicing indifference towards externals. And it seems like that, from many different sources of wisdom, is the path that has been prescribed for human beings to walk in order to achieve liberation from suffering and to arrive at the highest forms of existence on this planet, is detachment. Not attachment, but detachment.
Isn't that interesting?
It's very fascinating. I don't think I'd made that connection. I love detachment theory. Hopefully you can elaborate that.
Well, think about it with relationship. So if back to the absorbed consumptive, if I allow myself to be absorbed into the relationship, and trust me, this is what most men do who have a strong problem with relationship. I'm absorbing myself. I'm allowing myself to be lost in the relationship because you are the one that's going to make me feel better. You're going to give me that external validation. So I'm going to lose my identity, lose my wants and needs, and I'm going to pursue you to be able to grant on me or confer onto me my value and worth. That's what's called a reflected sense of self. And so that's what we usually do. That is that's a really unhealthy attachment, but it's seeking the attachment for being able to resolve, like I said, my internal conflicts of not feeling good about myself or not feeling whole or complete. And so the whole idea of being detached and a separate human being standing on my own 2 feet is actually a powerful relational construct. It's huge. It's really, really big, because then that allows me now to have a really healthy relationship.
Okay, so let's take a slightly different tack because I'm
Okay.
listening to this conversation through
Yeah, I
through
can
the
see
lens
your
of
head. I can see it working in
some
there.
of my audience. So
Yep.
we talked a little bit ago about some of the modern challenges that you see facing men,
Hmm.
and we talked about the nice guy syndrome and this idea to people please women, to forego our own values or needs in the indirect expectation of getting sex or relationship. I think that definitely exists. What I'm seeing more and more of in recent years, especially online, is I'm not even going to go to a relationship. It's more like the black pill stuff, which is
Yes.
what's the point? You've talked a lot about bringing women in to create this sort of relationship.
Hmm.
You told me right before this conversation, you recently celebrated your 39th wedding
Hmm.
anniversary.
Yep.
So I think a lot of guys are going to, some guys are going to hear this and think, yeah, that sounds good, Ken, but the risks are really high associated with that. They certainly, while there might be some benefits, they don't seem to outweigh the costs or the liabilities of that kind of relationship. Um, and it just doesn't seem worth it because I might be able to get those things elsewhere at lower cost and for less risk. Do you have any response to something like that?
I totally agree. Well, our day and our, our day and age, man, I'm telling you, like the whole thing of like, what 75% of divorces are initiated by women. Every single week, I personally am wrestling with processing things with guys who are going through a really, really horrible court system that we have. It is wretched. It is so distorted that it pisses me off every week, just how horribly men are treated in our court system. So the answer is yes, it is high risk. It is horror. And yes, so here I am. I love the idea of marriage. I think marriage, I've given my life to it, my studies to it, everything. I think it's an amazing thing, but I totally agree with the guys that feel like this is too high of a risk. It
Well,
is a really significant risk.
oh, absolutely. Because, like you said, the majority of divorce is initiated by women. If there's children involved, the family courts almost always favor the women. Men can be financially castrated
Oh, it's
by a
horrible.
divorce. Oftentimes, men have spent the last 20 years of their lives spending half of their waking lives working their jobs and the other half of their waking lives attending to their wife and children. So any friends have long since fallen by the wayside. If they do have any kind of social activity, it's generally through the woman who orchestrates that. So when that falls apart, the man is often left feeling alone and isolated because he hasn't been attending to his own personal relationships and male friendships. And that's also what causes really negative outcomes for men in the wake of divorce. But we're also talking about, so that all that is
Okay.
true.
Yes.
So, but here's the other thing, which is the statistics look bad, but you don't
Hmm.
get involved. You don't marry a statistic.
Mm-mm.
Any given woman on a long enough time frame actually has a 0 or 100% chance that it will end in a divorce. It's
Hmm.
just like in the aggregate, the population level that we say it's like, 55% of marriages will end in divorce or something like that. It's not just the risks on the statistical level for me. It's more like I've yet to see a relationship. I've yet to see a marriage, especially looking at the man in that marriage, where I think, wow, I want what he's having.
Hmm. Hmm.
His life is better than my life. He gets to do things that I don't get to do. His happiness is greater than mine. And I think that is, in conjunction with the known risks, is part of like, well, what's the point here? You know what I'm saying?
I
But
do.
maybe
I
I'm
do.
just missing something. And because relationships feel very different on the inside than looking at them from the outside, for sure.
So let's because the question you posted was more and what the way I answered, agreeing with you, yes, it's a high risk, right? But think about how many people do get married, and I think the amount of marriages that end in divorce, if you don't count the second and third and fourth divorces, it's like 44%.
It's lower.
Something like that. Right?
That's still pretty high, though.
It is. It's way high. But then if you think about it, then if it's 44, that means 56% die or end in death. Right. And so
and one more thing to interject here, which is that just because 56% of first marriages don't end in divorce doesn't mean that they're happy, successful, thriving relationships either.
So that's really the question that you're asking.
Yeah.
Right. So if you do find yourself, or you do choose to be married, how do you do this well? And that's kind of goes back to our question of the detachment, or the whole idea of frame. And for a man to be able to build frame is that idea, like we were saying, the most powerful part of your frame. You think about it, frame like a frame of a house. You got the foundation that's built on the rocks, and then on top of the foundation you got your base plate and your studs and the top plate, and you got your headers, and you got your joists, and you got all the wood and stuff that goes into the house that creates a frame that now this house is sturdy. This house is not going to fall apart. This house has structural integrity. It's not going to break. That's what you want to be able to develop within yourself. And one of the most powerful components of that frame in a man is my identity, my sense of self-worth, my sense of value internally, that this is who I know that I am. This is where my value and worth rest within me. And it's that sense of confidence. I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. And I'm able to hold that fast and firm within me. And the other parts of me, my integrity, my sense of my values, my moral compass, the categories of, just, let's see, even creating a vision for my life and what I have for, well, here's where I'm going in my life. This is my frame. This is what I'm holding together. And so the thing is, if I bring that into the marriage and I have it, this is actually the thing that is that confidence that I know who I am, and I'm not going to move. I'm not going to break. I'm not going to be shaken and fall apart. That is the thing that's attractive to a woman. And so maintaining that throughout your marriage is a really significant part of being able to do that relationship well. And so that whole idea of maintaining that frame, and not, like we're saying, not kind of submitting to how many, what do you call it? 1,000 cuts of
betaization by
like giving
concessions.
Concessions. That's what it was, where I concede here and there. Sure, we can do this or do that. That's part of being in a relationship. Today she chooses what, we go to Mexican food. Great. Tomorrow I'm going to say we're going to Italian or whatever. That's kind of how it's give and take in a relationship. But I can't concede myself. I can't let myself, my wants, my desires, my vision, my moral compass to be allowed to disintegrate in the relationship. That's where the relationship is lost, because if I'm lost, the relationship's lost.
Sure. I hear that, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Ken. I'm just going to try to summarize what I think would be the argument from this portion of my audience.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Which is, I hear you, Ken, and I believe you. So I believe that it might be possible to have a successful marriage. And what that means is like creating a very strong foundation, and solidifying your identity and developing some kind of framework to invite the woman into, and learning how to maintain frame and overcome the testing that necessarily occurs in the courtship and throughout the relationship, and having some sense of game to keep the passion and interest alive, and being able to potentially have the resources to provide for a family, and if you do all of those things, then you might be able to have a successful marriage. And I think the argument would be like, how about we just do something that has a higher chance of success, that is much easier to accomplish than going through these 10 things that could take decades to develop, to minimize the risk of something that may not even work after all, because you're not in control of the situation. Once you get married, you cede a lot of your power, because you...
Yeah, and Ryan, you're not even talking about one of the most important parts of this, and that is vetting a really good woman.
Exactly, because that's another thing. It's like a lot of the response that to that is like, no, if you just chose the wrong woman. Well, that could be true.
Yeah.
No one gets married thinking they're going to get divorced, except maybe predatory women. But yeah, it's like, yeah, learn how to vet a woman, learn how to
It's all the
date
above
friend.
that you're
It's
saying.
like there's so many things, and then maybe if things don't go sideways, you might be able to have a happy relationship. It's like, how about we just go straight to, I want to be happy with fewer steps. So it's like, why go through all of this trouble just to have a marriage? Do you have a response to that?
Well, part of what I'm saying is this is how you would have a great life anyway.
Okay, I hear that.
I mean, you cannot have a good life if you're a single man without frame.
Absolutely.
And so it doesn't matter what you choose as your life, having a strong sense of self, a strong, differentiated person that doesn't absorb into all these other things is what you want anyway. So that work is work you're going to need to do no matter what anyway.
I made a video about this, that hypergamy actually only indirectly benefits women, and it directly benefits men. Like, to become a stronger, more solid, higher net worth, more successful man, how does that not benefit the man in question? And it can only indirectly benefit the woman if the man chooses to share those things with her. So I'm with you on that, which is that these things that make for a successful relationship with a woman more directly and primarily benefit the men involved.
And so maybe Orion, the whole idea of talking to the guys that maybe they're MGTOW guys and somebody who's just, I'm not going to get married anyway. They know that that's the case. And I'm fine with that. Make your choices, do what you want to do. Maybe more of what we're doing is we're talking to men who find themselves in a marriage that isn't where they want them to be. It's not as happy. It's not as connected. They're maybe on the verge of divorce and that type of thing. And so being able to consider, what changes can I make in my life? And rather than working to say, or having all the energy, I need to save my marriage, to be able to say, no, I need to save my soul first. I need to become the man that I really want to be. I need to get out of the nice guy syndrome. I need to become more internally referenced and stop being externally referenced, doing the happy wife, happy life thing, which, by the way, if you turn that around, it actually works. The whole happy life, happy wife. If a man has a happy life and he has that frame and he's really living well, actually the women are really happy with that.
In general, I think people also are about as happy as they choose to be, and there's some that just choose not to be happy.
I'm just saying, if you flip it.
Oh yeah, I think that was clever. I appreciate that. I think it's true.
It's true, but then the whole thing of one thing that Sean has told us is the whole thing of, if you're responsible for her happiness, you're also responsible for her unhappiness. And that's a really tough pitfall. But that's just, I'm using that as an illustration, that living, just changing the mode, the role that you have in your marriage, that I'm not living to make her happy. I'm not living to submit to her and to make everything work in her life, to change and shift what's going on and change and moving into what we were calling selfishness earlier, where I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to build my frame. I'm going to build those things I talked about that are frame, and see where this goes.
Okay. So you've mentioned in this conversation that, yes, our relationship does require some concessions from time to time.
Yep.
It does require some sacrifices. It can be expensive in terms of just resources broadly defined.
Yep.
Here you are, 39 years into your marriage. Like, what have you gotten from marriage that you feel you might not have gotten any other way, even if you had done everything to consolidate your identity, create frame for yourself, pursue your purpose, but you just never entered into that kind of relationship with a woman? What does marriage uniquely give you 39 years into that situation?
Man, Orion, I got to tell you, I feel incredibly fulfilled in my life. It has been, I have had an amazing life. I have a family who loves me. I have 3 adult children. I have 2 grandsons. One's on the way in October. The whole, I have a wife that just loves me. I love her. We are great companions. We do a lot of fun things together. We enjoy each other's company. There's just a ton of love going around in my life in a number of different ways, with my kids, with my in my marriage. I just feel incredibly fulfilled.
Sounds like
I
it.
just feel really, really good in my life.
Well, one of the things that I have argued, that fundamentally marriage is an institution to raise children and to have a family.
Absolutely.
And that's really where you went, is that when I asked that question, the answer that I heard was like, well, it has allowed me to be surrounded by multi-generational family that is loving and warm and fulfilling.
Supportive, yes, everything. Yeah.
Would it be possible to have that without getting married, or is married in your mind a requisite for that?
Well, to be able to raise kids like I think kids need to be raised, they need mom and dad. So if you're going to have kids, there are people. My daughter's actually, to your point, the whole thing of, can I have a group of people around me just loving and caring? My daughter is not married, and she has created a really significant network of community around her. She's done a great job. She has so many friends, and she is surrounded by a lot of really lovely, beautiful people. And so she's done that. And I think it would be possible to have a community around you. But as far as family, I don't know.
Might be more difficult to logistically to navigate the co-parenting if
Yeah,
you're married.
yeah.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
Definitely with co-parenting for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
To raise kids, I think ultimate is mom and dad together for sure.
That said, I'm a child of divorce who is a child of divorce himself, and I often kind of shudder when I hear men say that they're just staying in really unhappy relationships for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can speak to that. My personal and professional opinion on this is that yes, it's better to have an intact family to raise children. But if that intact family is chaotic, dysfunctional, and abusive, it's better for everyone involved to end that. And sometimes divorce can be a step in the right direction.
You know what? In some cases, absolutely, for sure. I'm with you on that. But the whole thing of
Staying together
yeah,
for the kids. What do you think about that idea?
staying together for the kids, if it's not abusive and chaotic, like you're saying, if it's something that we kind of have a cold burn or whatever, and you're able to get it done, man, I just don't know why people don't fight for the marriage, don't fight for the relationship, and just don't you know and that's part of the whole thing of, if I've conceded so much that I just now have no voice, and I can't set a boundary, and I can't say what I want, or I don't have a vision, or I can't lead to where I want it to go, then I'm not in the relationship.
Well, this is interesting. So why wouldn't somebody fight for the relationship? I'm sure there's many reasons for that. But since we know that the vast majority of divorces are initiated by women, maybe one of the reasons why I wouldn't fight for the relationship is that I feel that I might be able to maintain my standard of living and my lifestyle by separating, and I wouldn't have to deal with this person anymore. Maybe I'm also hearing friends or going on social media, and I have this fear of missing out. Maybe I feel like this is boring. I could get more exciting relationships elsewhere, and it's kind of no skin off my back. I can walk away with a fat paycheck. Maybe that's why some people wouldn't fight for a relationship.
I imagine.
Hmm.
I don't know the direction where we're going with this. I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure exactly what the question is, Orion, or how you want to, what you're really getting at.
Well, you said just a few minutes ago that you didn't know why people didn't fight for their relationships.
Yes.
And I took that as a non-rhetorical question. And I suggested one reason why some people might not fight for their relationships. Do you have any other reasons why someone wouldn't fight for their relationship?
Well, just the one that I gave, that they've conceded so much that they no longer have a voice, or think that they do have a voice. And I think that, to me, that's what a lot of the guys that I work with, that's kind of where they're at. And so then my work is, how do you, when I talk about empowering men, one of the significant things is giving a man a voice, and it starts with what do you want, and then how do you communicate what you want with your partner, and to be able to have that as, now this is on the front burner. I'm saying what I want. And then she can say what she wants as well. But now actually we're starting to say something. We're starting to start the conversation. But if you're sitting back in the whole thing, like you said earlier, with the covert contract, I am seeking what I want, but I'm only doing it covertly with a kind of a passive way of trying to get what I want without communicating it. That's not going to get you anywhere. And that's what most guys do. But starting to say, this is what I want, this is how I want to be treated, this is where I want the relationship to go. Most guys don't even get to that spot where they're actually talking about it. I don't think women do either. Women just live by these expectations. If I feel, whatever, the whole thing that, the line that women have, the I love you, but I'm not in love with you, so we're going to get a divorce. It's like, yeah, that's all about expectation. And the way to be able to define that statement, I oxytocin you, but I don't dopamine you. It's like, I'm bonded to you, I love you, but I don't have this thrill anymore. And it's like, what is the expectation, that you have this thrill your entire marriage all the time? And that's what some TV shows and everything portray. It's kind of the mythology of relationship. And it's like, and that, if that's what you're seeking, it's gonna fall apart.
That's a tough sell, especially I think for young people who want to do the FOMO and go out and have all of the experiences and the feelings. That kind of more temperate, companionate love is, I don't think, very interesting for 20-somethings.
No, because you know what? When it really comes down to it, it's kind of boring. True love is boring. Is that weird to say that? It's peaceful. It's content. It doesn't. Every once in a while, you get the dopamine hit, but it's not constant. It's more relaxed. Yeah.
Alexander said more or less the same thing, and I do think that is a sign of a healthy, successful relationship, is some degree of peacefulness and harmony. Yeah, but that's a tough one, because it does feel like you have to put a part of yourself to bed.
Actually, I'm not sure. Yes, maybe you do, but but I think what you're doing is, maybe part of you is going to bed, and it might be that more immature part of you. And a more mature part of you, actually, you find that the peace and content and harmony actually is way more valuable than feeling the dopamine hit every once in a while, or constantly.
You might be right. I mean, we're in an interesting social moment. As you know, the average age of first marriage continues to creep up and up and up. Right now, it's around 30 in the United States. And I think a generation ago, it was probably like 25, and maybe 2 generations ago, it was closer to 22.
Teens, yeah.
Right. So, and there's this trope of like midlife crises. And I've thought about this phenomenon, and I think that is a result of, let's say, taking on premature maturity and potentially entering into this type of relationship or social obligation too soon, without any kind of sowing of the wild oats or development of the sense of self. And so the person gets to be middle-aged, has the first brush of mortality, realizes he's never lived for himself his entire life, and stereotypically has an affair with the secretary and buys a sports car or something like that. Now we kind of have the opposite problem, which is people are spending their entire 20s and sometimes their entire 30s living for themselves. Potentially, that means that when they're finally ready to settle down, they might actually be able to do so for the long term. But it comes with other problems because of the mate selection process in the reproductive windows as well. But that's an interesting idea. Do you feel like people kind of need to get that out of their system before they can really settle down in the way that you described?
That's a great question. I don't think it's necessary. The thing is, it becomes a high value. You said FOMO, am I missing out?
Yeah,
What is it that I really value? Do I value going off and doing all these things that I can do as a single person? Or do I really value, I want to build a family, and I want to build a legacy, and I want to build something? Or the other category that I didn't bring up, we were talking about how marriage or marriage in particular is designed for building a family, raising kids, right? The other two things that I think it's designed for is it's going to grow us up toward maturity. You cannot do relationship without becoming more mature. It's going to force you to learn something about yourself and to become a more mature individual. And then the third thing is all about well-being. The relationship creates more well-being. It creates more support, connectedness, security, things like that. That's what that's what relationship does. But the whole idea of the building you up to become more mature is something that people don't understand, that they enter into a relationship, because nobody tells us this, that it's designed to grow you up toward maturity. And so I think that's where everybody in a relationship, whether you're kicking and screaming or whether you actually engage in the process, you're going to grow up.
sure.
And that's going to happen. And so, but what we're talking about is a single person, if they go all the way to 35 and then they realize, it's time. They've experienced a lot, but they really haven't grown up.
Mm.
And relationship grows you up big time. And it is something, gosh, I don't know what answer I'm giving you. I don't know what question I'm answering.
I think you answered the question. What I heard is that it's not, you don't believe that it's necessary to kind of sow your wild oats before
I don't.
you commit to that.
No, because it was back to the whole idea of values. Do I value sowing your wild oats? I'm going, if I value going and have sex with multiple people, is that a value? Do I value going partying until the sun comes up? Is that a value? Do I value, traveling all over the world? Maybe that's a value, seeing new things and meeting new people. Or like I said, do I value raising a family?
As a contrary position, I'm reminded of a line from the Tao Te Ching that I really like, which is to make something contract, you must first allow it to expand. And that has been true in my own life, that it's much easier for me to let go of certain things and to grow when I feel like I've exhausted them. That's just me personally. And I think that might be true for some other people as well, that if they don't do the thing that they really want to the extent that they want to do it, they might have a regret, and it might inappropriately cloud their present moment because they're thinking about the life that they weren't quite ready to give up but did for some other reason.
Yeah. Orion, could we come to this conclusion that, like, you and I have two totally different trajectories in our lives, right? I got married when I was 23, had just had my 39th anniversary, I have grandkids, it's like, and your life's moving in a different direction. So you're kind of giving what do you call it? You're saying, you're kind of giving, here's what I think that the benefit of that lifestyle would have been or is. And I want to be able to just respect both, and to be able to go, both of those trajectories are just fine, what somebody chooses for their life. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, that makes sense to me. Certainly, one of the things that that might be difficult about the institution of marriage is that it is kind of a one-size-fits-all thing. I read a book recently about, I think it was a West African society that had like 13 different legal and social forms of marriage. And I thought that was a fascinating idea, that we can have different arrangements to accommodate the different needs of the community, as opposed to this is the way it has to be for everybody. And it either works or it fails, often spectacularly, and it's failing a lot, even at 44%. So I think that it's different strokes for different folks, and that we should potentially consider keeping a more open mind about the nature and structure of relationships. I made an episode about this a while back. I think it's one thing that straights can learn from gays and that population who have never really had traditional models of the way that their relationships are supposed to look like. And so they're more or less forced to communicate exhaustively about the nature and structure of the relationship, and ideally to custom tailor it to the individuals in question. And that it's really nobody else's business what they do besides their own.
Yeah.
Versus
So, okay. Yes. And I think the
straight
way,
marriages or straight relationships are like, this is how they are.
it is. This is how it is. And that's what I'm saying. This is the expectation of it. This is how it starts. This is how you do it. All the projection of dating and engagement and marriage. You have a wedding, and your wedding goes like this, and then you live happily ever after. All the expectation, and it's so much. It's how it's marketed. And you think about how the diamond industry has marketed it. Oh, you have the diamond, and you're going to be somebody, and here's where it goes, and all this, and then you have the wedding, and you're the princess, and all this stuff happens, and it's all the same stuff with this expectation of this is what the marriage is going to provide. And that's the whole thing of the mythology, I think, mythology of the marriage, where this is not what it's going to provide. And I think you've said this in your in some of your podcasts, the whole thing of how marriage has transitioned. I mean, 100 years ago, it was predominantly for survival. It was still about survival. It's about you connect with a person, you have a family, and it's about this is how we survive. This is how we make things happen. And
because you couldn't do it alone. I mean, it was just
you couldn't do it alone. You couldn't. And so so now in 100 years is not very long, and it's not even been that. It's probably more like 50 years that it's really shifted from that. Because you think about coming out of the Korean War, the Depression, the World War II, Korean War, life was still really rough. And so just within 50 years here, we find ourselves in this abundant place where life is really good, and so we can afford to feel like I want to have this in the relationship,
or we don't need the other person as much. I think that across time and across culture, it's like average number of children or birth rates are pretty strongly correlated to like GDP and average annual incomes. And the more prosperous the society, the lower the birth rate, like period.
Yeah.
You still see cultures today that are having, on average, certainly more than 2 children, but their economies aren't nearly as good. So that's interesting. Maybe we come together more out of necessity than we would like to admit.
But it's to your point of the thinking about how would you have other categories of a relationship, of a marriage, because it's not made for survival anymore. And some marriages aren't about raising children, and some, and I just, I don't know. That's kind of got my head spinning, and what would that mean and everything. But I think
what it would look like. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't either. But just thinking about at least being able to have it to where people understand this is what marriage is. And because I don't think people go into it knowing what it really is.
So that you're right. They just, to use your language, they just understand the mythology, what it's supposed to be or what they think it's going to be, because all they see is the weddings and the bridal gowns and the diamond rings and the proposals and the gender reveals and all that stuff. But we don't really have good access to the everyday workings of any relationship, any marriage, let alone a successful marriage. And so people don't often know what they're getting into. And maybe that's part of the reason why there's such a high divorce rate.
And I think why women are the ones that are initiating, because they're the ones that have been taught that this is what the marriage is. And now they're in the marriage and the honeymoon's over and we have kids, and all of a sudden it's not as peachy as it was once was. And it's not what they've told me it was going to be, because it's a lot harder than I imagined. And so then all of a sudden I'm not happy. And so therefore I'm going to go ahead and file or whatever.
That makes sense.
And so
is there a way to solve that problem?
Okay. I wish there was a way.
I mean, there has to be something that can be done. I don't know if you can like legislate this, but maybe one possible solution is is spending more time with like the older generation, maybe people who have been married for at least 10 years, if not longer, to kind of get a more accurate understanding of what's in store, to actually have relationships beyond your age or generational cohort, who can kind of tell you, this is what you might be in for. This is what you might have to look forward to.
No, it's not what you might have to. This is what you're gonna. The honeymoon will be over.
Because there has been a decline in certainly the extended family, and I think connected to that is intergenerational friendships. Is that most people's friends are within like a couple of years of them, and that's what they know. I think it's actually really useful to have friends who are in an older generation, in particular,
absolutely,
younger men.
Yep, absolutely. That's a whole nother conversation, Orion.
Sure. Yeah, we've already talked for a while, so maybe we can do that another time. So if people want to know more about you, Ken, how could they get in touch with you?
Sure. So my website is solidman.com. And so Ken at solidman.com would be my email. And then and there's other ways to link into on the email on the website as well. And you can just see a little bit what I'm all about. You can purchase my books online on Amazon. Just go to Ken Curry LMFT, and I've got 4 books on there, which was my curriculum for my men's groups, just turned into books. So if you want to work through that, that's definitely an option there. And I do have men's groups that I have that are online. So that would be an option if any of your guys are looking for men's groups.
I know that there are men out there who are. So I don't know if you have a lot of space in your men's groups currently. So let's manage expectations. Do you have a wait list?
I have 3 groups, and 2 groups are full. And so there's wait lists for those. And it takes a bit for an opening to come up, but if you want to be on the wait list, you can. The one group that's open is Wednesday morning at 6:30 a.m. to 8 a.m. That's Mountain Time, and so it's pretty early if you're on the West Coast.
Yeah,
but there's definitely space in the morning group. So yeah.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Ken. I think that you brought a new perspective to relationships and marriage in particular. It's one of the more reasonable critiques against my channel, is that as an unmarried guy, what do I have to be speaking about marriage in particular? So I think it was a valuable perspective, Ken. So thanks again for coming on the show.
You're welcome. It was fun. Thanks, Orion.
All right, man. Bye-bye.
Bye.